Welcome to the official launch of the Economic and Environmental Impact Study of the historic and classic motor industry in the UK. A big thank you to all of you for joining us today and to learn of the surprising news of the size of the industry, the revelations which are hopefully going to come out today, which are going to help us shape the future of the industry and this incredible business sector. What is really important is whether you're a journalist, whether you're an economist, whether you're an enthusiast, or you're just along to find out what's going on today, is that either through stories or communication at club level, that the word is spread about this business and it needs to be taken seriously and considered at a level never thought before. It's now a big player and a major contributor to the economy, as we're about to find out. With us on our illustrious panel, a very great panel of experts today to help us launch this study, are four people who are key players in the industry. They're passionate about the industry, they really are, but at the same time they will remain totally objective about the business and the classic motor industry and where it is going. And very importantly, they all care about the environment. Again, you're going to hear that from them at the same time. In terms of downloading the report, if you look where you are on the YouTube channel, on our Hero YouTube channel, you can find below the video, you will see in the descriptions an area how you can download that. Just to give you an idea, this incredible 60-page report has already been downloaded no less than 300 times, and I can tell you where. In the USA, Switzerland, Australia, Italy, Ireland, Spain, Germany, Netherlands, Canada, and Norway, to name but a few. Also, if you would like to ask questions, which we will put to the panel, you can go onto the comments section of our YouTube channel as well, and you can find out there. So, our illustrious panel. First of all, Doug McWilliams is one of the world's leading economists. He is founder and deputy chairman of award-winning CEBR, the Centre for Economic and Business Research. His company have conducted major influential economic studies and forecasting for public organisations, FTSE companies, government bodies. He's also a wealth of experience himself as an economist, including time as chief economic advisor for the CBI, and I understand IBM as well, Doug. In fact, he wrote a very successful book called The Flat White Economy on the economics of IT and telecoms. He's a keen motorist. He drove his 1958 Bentley S1 about 12,000 miles from Peking to Paris. Quite a challenge in 2019. And he's a massive rugby player, so he's okay with me, and he's a big fan. That's fine by me, but he's the chief architect of this revealing study and will be taking us through key elements to help us launch it. And also Driving the Silk Road, a book that he wrote about his experiences, also looks at business in the Far East. I think it's available this Christmas as well. Doug asked me to remind everybody, but
thank you very much.
Ben Cousins is with us. Ben, thank you very much for being with us. He's the chairman of the Royal Automobile Club. And the club has been creating history in motoring, in racing and rallying since 1897. They've been there for the motorist, the motor industry and its causes. In fact, under Ben's stewardship, he's more than ever ensuring that the club is the spiritual home of motoring through influence, and by hosting national motoring events and activities. With 17,000 members, the Royal Automobile Club is the longest standing motoring institution in the UK. In Ben, they have a chairman who really puts his money where his mouth is, and he rallies and he races with equal skill in classic and vintage cars. For example, we see him in his C-Type Jaguar in races at the Revival, the Collins Trophy, for example, or on the Flying Scotsman, but he's also a two-wheeled adventurer. He loves his motorbikes. I won't call him a nutter at this point, but he certainly goes where no man would go with a motorcycle. At the same time, providing support and assistance through research in many areas of the industry via the Royal Automobile Club Foundation. Ben, thanks for being with us today. David Whale is the chairman of the Federation of British Historic Vehicle Clubs, which exists to uphold the freedom to use historic vehicles on the road. It does this by representing the interests of owners of historic vehicles, whether they are steam-driven tractors, buses, motorbikes, or cars. They do this to politicians, government officials, and legislators, both in the UK and through FIVA, the Fédération Internationale des Véhicules Anciens, and it's FIVA as we know it in Europe. So perhaps, David, you'll talk us through the new driving permits we need for distant Europe later on during this broadcast. So there are over 540 subscriber organisations in the Federation, representing a total membership of over 250,000. So I said they were experts, and they certainly are. Quite a panel. But I've saved the final panel introduction for our host here at Bicester Heritage, and the man who commissioned this extraordinary study, because he cares deeply about the industry and its future, Thomas de Vargas Machuca. Thomas is the chairman of Hero ERA, the world's leading historic motoring rally platform. He's a managing partner of Consortium Capital Group and was until recently the co-CEO of Adler Real Estate in Germany. He was an executive director at UBS and vice president of Credit Suisse. He's also a rally competitor himself, an avid sailor, and he also works within that sport to help open up ownership for young people in sailing. What I can say is that he's passionate about craftsmanship, about preserving heritage and ensuring skills are passed on so that they don't die. He actively supports apprentices and the well-being of the people in the industry. He has an American mother, an Italian father. He was educated in Scotland, so we're looking forward to seeing which accent he's going to use today. I'm sure we all agree that we have a highly qualified panel to help us launch the economic and environmental study. And I'm going to say that is very, very big news. With those of you that have seen the release already know about the size of the industry and what a boost it is to the UK economy just when it needs it. So, Doug McWilliams, the author along with your team of this report, when you started work on this, did you have any idea how large the industry was?
I probably ought to have from my last garage bill. But actually, I had no idea that the turnover would be as much as £18.3 billion. Now, turnover does include a bit of double counting. If you're restoring my car and I supply a radiator to you, the radiator gets in when I sell it to you and then when you present the overall bill. So there's a bit of double counting there. If you take out the double counting, you get an economist measure called gross value added. And on gross value added, which is a very comparable basis, the industry contributes £8.7 billion a year to the economy.
Doug, in terms of that graphic as well, it's the size, same size as UK ports industry. Just give us an idea of the kind of scale of where it is now.
If you look at the graphic, it's about a fifth of the size of the whole heritage industry. That's on the left-hand side. It's about double the size of the whiskey industry. That's on the right-hand side. Half the size of all the coffee industry, all the coffee houses, and all the coffee that's created in the UK. Very similar in size to ports and to the creative arts sector. So that gives some idea of its scale within the economy.
Doug, further to that, just explain the employment numbers across the industry chain and its spread over the UK, because it's not just in one area, for example, it's just not London-based.
Well, the industry in total generates 113,000 jobs, of which only 5% are London-based. Roughly 10% are West Midland, roughly 10% are East Anglia. So it's very much an out-of-London story, this. The way the jobs pan out is 52,000 are directly employed in the industry. And then another 40,000 are the suppliers to those people. And then there's what we call induced employment, which come from the spending of all of these people, and that brings up the overall total of 113,000.
Right, David Whale, you've conducted your regular survey, and you've seen incredible growth as well. So this tallies, you're singing off the same hymn sheet, really.
Well, indeed. We've been conducting the National Historic Vehicle Survey since 1997. And the market value on that first research was £1.6 billion. Since then, we've seen consistent growth, and we've just announced a 30% increase compared to the research in 2016, when we had a value of 5.5 billion, and that has now grown to 7.2 billion.
So this is another underlying message. Take us seriously. This sector, this industry sector is growing hugely. Doug, I know that David and you collaborated. You got a lot of your figures for the study from David Whale as well, and from his group, so unified in purpose. But in that research information, there are two different ways that you looked at it, and we've got a couple of graphs here just to illustrate that. Just talk us through the difference in the findings and why there are slightly different totals.
It depends what you call a classic or a historic vehicle. David's work is all done on the basis of historic vehicles. And an historic vehicle is a vehicle that's more than 30 years old. Our figures not only have the historic vehicles included in, but they also have what we've decided to call classic. Now, we've used an HMRC official definition, which is that it includes all those vehicles that are either more than 15 years old and worth more than £15,000, or any vehicles more than 20 years old that are worth keeping. And so the gap between David's 1.5 million historic vehicles and our 3 million total, which is basically another 1.5 million of classic vehicles, these are these younger ones, often quite a lot cheaper, and often ones that are attracting younger people into the industry.
Okay, thank you very much, David and Doug. Ben Cousins, in your work as the chairman of Royal Automobile Club and all the aspects of your work in motoring, this report, the results of this report have to be a very, very strong tool for you to be able to use at higher levels, and other people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's never been any shortage of passion in the historic world, but actually, if you're going to fight your corner and defend your right to carry on driving your car or enjoy it, then you need facts. And it's great that we've brought together the FBH, VC, Hero, and the Royal Automobile Club to produce a really strong and fact-based report that, in an era when media, it seems to be that people are listening to he who shouts loudest. When you go to government, what they want to do, they want facts, they want to hear from one point of contact. They don't just want to hear from different people saying different things. And what Doug's done is really collate a very strong argument that's up to date. It's very current, and I think it's key. You know, David said earlier, they started in 1997, but you can't rely on 1997 data because the industry has moved on. So we've got something very current and very powerful that certainly will be very useful in government levels and below.
Brilliant, great. Thomas, turning to you now, because you commissioned this impact study. What motivated you to do that?
Well, you know, Patrick and I are running one of the UK leading classic car platforms. And, you know, with that comes responsibility in such a role. Of course, bringing the awareness to the wider audience, whether you're a lawmaker or whether you're a law taker, to make sure that heritage and other elements that we'll talk about, no doubt, are protected. So effectively responsibility, awareness, and protection.
Okay, just a reminder for those of you that are online, and you're on our YouTube channel now, below the video you can see the description, and you'll find out how you can download your copy, all free of charge. That is downloadable, the 60-page report. And also, if you send in your questions, you can see the comments section there as well. Thomas, what do you want to achieve from the results of the study?
Look, I think what's important for us is to make sure that we are able to have the necessary protections for the industry, so that this is not something that we enjoy in our lifetime, but that we can pass on to the next generation. And this is the next generation of mechanics, of apprentices, of panel beaters, of upholsterers, of participants on events, on event organizations, media, and the whole value chain that we're talking about today, obviously described in detail by the report that Doug and his team at CBR has come out. So I think that's really our mission as a responsible participant. But of course, we can't do these things alone. And so we thought it was an important thing to call upon, obviously, institutions with which we have a daily and very good relationship, the Federation, the club, and CBR, to put together something fit for purpose for everybody to have a look and understand a bit better.
Were you surprised when you found out the size of the industry, 18.3 billion turnover?
I have to echo Doug's comment, judging by some of the costs that I have to incur on my cars. No, but jokes aside, I was surprised by the number, but I was reassured to read the Federation's numbers, reassured to see that so much of the positive effects of this expenditure remains in the economy. It is non-London based. Actually, to be perfectly honest with you, I think the best element was the satisfaction, the well-being element of how people are happy to work in the industry because it's fulfilling. Now, of course, anytime you work in an industry where you have also the passion to go with it, but I thought that was the most reassuring thing, rather than the head number itself, which of course is significantly more than what the last report in 2016 offered by the Federation was suggesting.
Ben, you've looked at all the figures and you've said, we've got these facts now to use, but economically, this is a good news story at the time when UK needs it. So how are we going to get that percolated through to people like the Chancellor and other people in those areas to get that recognition?
I think, well, the motorsports and the historic motor industry has very good contacts within government, but I think what this report really pulls out is the fact that whilst the name might be historic, we're actually a very current, vibrant, growing industry. It's irrelevant that we're here at Bicester Heritage today. What was a derelict bomber base abandoned by the RAF now is a completely vibrant community serving the needs of the historic car world. Over 150 people on site in employment that previously wouldn't have existed here. So it's the fact that the industry is growing, it's employing people. And what I really get excited about is the level of apprenticeship. 665 apprentices in 2019. Often the people that take apprenticeship are the people that they're failing at school. They're not necessarily the most academic people, but they've got hand skills. You see a panel beater shaping a panel. They're an artist. It's not manual labour. It's skilled labour, and like a true artist, like a Lucian Freud or anything. So to be bringing that number of young people in, giving them life skills that they can use to develop their career is absolutely fantastic.
I see everybody nodding in unison there. Even the crew, absolutely very, very valid point. Thank you. Doug, can you give us a breakdown of some of the areas of the industry and their contribution? Because there's quite a few sectors that make up the industry. And you can see that chart on your laptops and your screens at home.
You can see the table on the screen, and I'll go down some of the highlights. First of all, of those directly employed in the industry, that's the bottom line number, which is 52,000 in the penultimate column at the bottom of the penultimate column. But just coming down it, you've got 7,000 involved in sales and auctions and so on. You've got 2,000 involved in insurance. You've got 1,000 involved in transport. You've got 24,000 involved in repair and maintenance and so on. Another 2,000 involved in parts. And then 7,000 in conference organisations, 7,000 in sports, organising sports to do with this, 1,600 in conference organisations, and nearly 2,000 in museums. So it's a really widespread industry, and these are just the direct jobs. As well as the 52,000, there's an additional 40,000 of suppliers and an additional 20,000, roughly, of induced jobs from the spending that they make.
Wow. So that's a great breakdown as well, and that's why this 113,000 figure right across the chain, that gives you an idea of a breakdown, so you can look at that graph as well. Now, the second very, very pleasant surprise from the study was just how small the amounts of carbon emitted by the industry are. Now, none of us are pretending that there isn't still work to do. Of course there is. But by comparison, they are very small indeed. So, Doug, just take us through these two graphs as well, because the second of them is a comparison. And this first figure, which is the annual greenhouse emissions, just take us through that one.
Well, we've looked at how much people spend on different things, and we've categorized them as high emissions, medium emissions, and low emissions. And classic car comes into the low emissions category on this. Roughly, if you have an average spend of £8,000 a year, and that means that you're probably on the wealthier side, on your classic car, your emissions will be just over half a metric ton. That compares with emissions of 7 times that on just one single return flight to Hong Kong. It's about half the emissions from using your computer, or about half the emissions from using your mobile phone. And it's about 2/3 of the emissions from a week in Ibiza. So that gives you some idea.
Okay, so that second figure there, figure 12, which is the equivalence that you were talking about, to give us an idea of the comparisons of the sort of emissions.
Well, the way that people normally measure these things is they look at, if you spend £1,000 on this or £1,000 on that, what's the environmental impact? Now, the things where you get the biggest impact are things like flying, particularly long-haul flying. It may surprise you to know that if you spend £1,000 on loo rolls, the impact is nearly the same as if you fly to Hong Kong. However, what I would say is if you spend £1,000 on loo rolls, that will last you 18 years.
Have you been stocking up again, have you?
So, you'd really have to be stockpiling. By comparison, if you spend £1,000 on classic cars, it's roughly 80 kilograms, which is a very small amount. It's half of what it would be if you went out for a restaurant meal. It's half of what it would be if you spent the same money on beer. So it is really a very environmental way of spending your money. It is half of what it would be on food and drink. It is between a 20th and a 50th of what it would be if you spent your money on travel.
I think the important thing here as well is the small amount of usage of the vehicles. And the second thing is, in terms of, as Ben was talking about where we are here at Bicester Heritage, Bicester Motion, people are not manufacturing new parts, new cars. They are fixing old stuff. So the emissions are very low.
There are 3 elements to this. The first is the average classic car only gets used 1,200 miles a year, and that's David's figure. The second is that the main component is labor. It's not something that's made up of lots of energy and materials. It's something that's made up essentially of labor. And the third is that where materials are used, they are reused. And because this is a world of conservation and reuse, it means that you're not generating all the energy that's necessary to make something from scratch. So the combination of these 3 reasons is why the environmental profile is so small.
Okay. David, I'm coming to you on your average figure there per year of an historical classic vehicle. It's small, but the perception is very different. Gas guzzlers, big exhaust fumes, etc., etc. So what's to be done about altering the perception?
Well, as Doug's already indicated, our research, of course, focuses on historic vehicles and their international definition, which is being over 30 years old. And 5 years ago, the average annual mileage was 1,124 miles. The latest research, again, thank you for giving me the pre-release there, Doug, is exactly 1,200 miles. Now, remember, this data actually comes from 15,000 responses from enthusiasts. So this is quite a broad cross-section of enthusiasts that we're talking to. If you look at the number of responses to our research 5 years ago, it was just over 10,000. It grew to 15,000. Clearly, a lot of people at home and more time actually to complete the survey. To answer your question, Tony, what we've done for the first time is to identify the number of times historic vehicles are used per year. And on average, that's 16 times per year. So, of course, you know, in the winter months, these vehicles are sitting in garages, in barns, but they come out 16 times a year. What we need to do is actually to communicate that reality to members of the public. We already know that we have the public support. 21 million of the public in the UK have already said they see historic vehicles as an important part of our national heritage. So we need to communicate, let's keep the vehicles on the road, let them be seen, but actually, as Doug suggests, the impact of them is very, very limited.
Okay, good. So we've all got to keep working hard over the coming years to hammer those messages home. That's very clear. Ben, the government announced that the sale of new internal combustion engine cars would be banned from 2030. Now, just to give an example of how that percolated back into the industry as stuff and the apprentices, we know that at least 4 of the companies here at Bicester Heritage, parents of apprentices called through to their workplace and said, this is the end of the internal combustion engine. This is the end of historic cars, etc. Does that mean my son or my daughter has now lost their job? But that is the perception. What can we do about that?
You've got to separate, I think, what the Westminster bubble, and it's very much this announcement, in my view, it's quite an urban decision. There's space in the market for all forms of motive power, electric, hybrid. It's a very bold statement. The SMMT have said that it's going to be very challenging to achieve. And I think if you look at it on the more global perspective, there's large parts of the world for whom adopting electric is simply impossible. They haven't got the infrastructure. So hydrocarbons, I think, will be with us for some considerable period of time still. So in the short term, we can still continue to use them. But actually, I think the future that's really quite exciting is going to be synthetic fuel. Formula One are working very hard to develop third-generation synthetic fuels because it's not the fuel that's bad, it's simply the carbon content in it. Now, as you change the mix of fuel, if you can reduce that carbon, we're in the right trajectory, and that, I think, is the interim stage, with an aim to totally eliminate carbon out of fuel. So my personal view is 2030 is a tall order. I suspect there will be some amendments to that target, because I do believe it's almost impossible to achieve in terms of altering the fleet pool of cars. From a perspective of the historic car, well, I'm really upbeat. And on the final point, the original veteran car or emancipation run in 1896 effectively negated the need for horses overnight, because you didn't need a horse to tow a carriage. You now had a horseless carriage. But actually, the numbers of horses in the United Kingdom since that date have continued to grow. People found horses were a good, they could use them for racing, for riding, for leisure. Maybe not totally analogous, but I would argue that the historic car world is like that.
I'm smiling behind my mask because I knew you'd give us the reality of it, and that's absolutely right. David, let me come to you because you put out a positioning statement very soon after the statement from the government about the ban on ice. What essentially did you say? Was it roughly where Ben's going?
Well, to be honest, the background to all of this is very interesting, as the announcement was actually made as just one part of the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution for 250,000 jobs. That's where it first surfaced. To be honest, the adverse reaction from enthusiasts was immediate. You've already talked about parents of apprentices actually calling the colleges working here at Vista Heritage saying, is the end nigh? And so we felt that we needed to react very quickly. And the three elements were, and they are quite complex, so forgive me for reading from the position statement. But the first one said, ensuring the ban on new vehicles does not extend to restrictions on the use of pre-existing vehicles powered by fossil fuels. In particular, historic vehicles over 30 years old and future historic vehicles yet to reach the rolling 30-year classification of historic. Secondly, we said monitoring the effects of changing mainstream consumer demand for petrol and diesel on the accessibility and affordability of fuel supplies for vehicles requiring fossil fuels. And the third element was lobbying for the protection of fossil fuel supplies, or synthetics, as Ben suggests, long into the future to service historic vehicles. Now, we issued this very quickly, and I'm delighted to say that we do know that Secretary of State for Transport actually did receive our position statement. So that did land on his desk.
Mr. Shapps.
Mr. Shapps, yeah.
Excellent. Very, very good indeed. Thank you very much, David, for clearing that up. Thomas, turning to you, FBHVC have already employed an environmental officer, which is a great move. In terms of your own company, Hero ERA, it's the biggest motoring platform in the world, certainly for rallying. What are you going to do, and how would you respond to the greenest of critics who's going to come to you and your organisation and saying, you're a polluter?
Well, I think we need to be very clear with the difference between carbon production and carbon operating. And carbon operating is more towards, the contribution of carbon footprint from the tailpipes of the cars. Now, for those who follow what we do, we announced last year a green initiative under the Hero ERA platform that would help the classic car industry sequestrate the corresponding carbon that it emits. And we're currently working hard. Of course, the pandemic hasn't helped in that endeavor. We were going to be live by the end of this year. We've pushed that back, but we are very much on the front. And, I think we demonstrate on this panel how in touch and aware we are of this issue. We're not turning our heads back or living in denial. And, we made these announcements long before the government, address the problem, which is of great sensitivity. I think what you'll find is people with in the industry are very well aware of the wider environment and have no desire to contribute negatively. So it's good that we currently represent an insignificant contribution, but that doesn't mean that we should sit on our laurels. We should be proactive in resolving in any way, shape, or form those sensitivities.
Okay, questions are coming in to the panel. And I'm going to start with a question from Fairfuel UK. I'm going to come to you on this one, David. They ask, how will bringing the diesel and petrol ban being brought forward to 2030 impact on classic car owners with garages set to stop selling fuel? And what is the legislative impact of E10 in the industry, please?
Okay, so I think I've already partly answered the first aspect of that question. I think in terms of the E10 fuel, we have been very, very successful with our negotiations with the Department for Transport in ensuring the availability of what is called the E5 protection grade, which typically our vehicles require, and indeed classic vehicles particularly require, because a lot of the vehicles that maybe come from the 60s and 70s actually use quite a high degree of engine modification requiring a higher octane fuel to work. And previously, the E5 protection grade had been included in legislation actually for a period of 2 years. Following those recent submissions to government, the E5 protection grade has now been included in legislation for 5 years, which is the maximum permissible period. And I'm particularly heartened to see that one major supermarket chain actually stocks this product on their forecourt. The legislation actually calls for an E5, so maximum 5% ethanol content, at 97 octane, but very much recognizing the insight we were able to provide the fuel industry. The products which are being manufactured are of 98 or 99 octane, so these very much satisfy the technical requirements of these, shall we say, younger historic vehicles, the ones from the 60s and 70s. So we've got that covered. But what I hear the panelists say, and I think is really important, that there will never be one solution to this topic of keeping our vehicles on the road. It will evolve over time, and we have to be conscious of the evolution and keep on top of those developments.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, David. I think, Ben, this is a question for you, just because of your collaboration with Motorsport UK. But the rallying outlet, a little bit sideways, asks, were Motorsport UK consulted? I mean, I can say yes, they were, from us anyway. And what were their thoughts on the future of historic stage rallying?
Well, Motorsports UK is totally supportive of rallying. There are other pressures in terms of land access through the forest. That's proving challenging, both with the devolved government having different policies and different controls over the land that they're responsible for. But yeah, MS UK is very supportive, and I think long may it continue. That we're fighting very hard to ensure we can maintain access to both traditional venues and new venues.
Thank you, Ben. I'm going to come to each of you on this because I'm sure you all want to contribute. An inevitable question. It comes from Dominic Tobin, and he's the digital editor of Motorsport, and he's actually putting out a story today, and this is the last part of his story, and he commended the report, by the way, which is great. He said, the report mentions Brexit uncertainty. What are the ramifications of no deal, or a deal that doesn't recognise the industry's contribution? Are there specifics you'll be looking for from a deal? I'm going to start with you, David, please.
Well, of course, we're in an invidious position at the moment that we're still waiting to see whether a deal is possible or not. I think if we're able to strike a deal with the EU, then that's potentially very positive. I think if we have to revert to WTO rules, then all parties of the movement need to work closely together in order to minimise the potential impact of moving to WTO rules.
Ben?
We do need an agreement that allows freedom of movement of cars throughout Europe. It's worked very well in terms of growing the industry. I'm sure Thomas will comment on from an event organiser's perspective, but from a competitor's point of view, we're going back into, if I call it, the dark ages. You will need a carnet if we don't get a deal to take your car abroad. It will add significantly to the cost of competing, whether in a rally or a race in Europe. It will certainly delay your progress through the borders. And I think it will reduce the number of events. It's bad in every respect. It will shrink the industry. And leaving aside all the other Brexit issues, I really can't see why it can't be possible to get a deal very much akin to the freedom we have at the moment.
Thomas?
Well, I mean, as Ben suggested, of course, we're in the business of organising events not only in the UK but across the globe. So making the UK platform or documentation more difficult doesn't help anybody either going abroad or coming in, whether it's the harmonisation of the UK driving licence, insurance, green card, all of that mobility, of course, is impact. Now, there are other areas where we are connected to by virtue of what we do. I mean, we obviously organize events that people enjoy. They use their cars. Their cars need to then be serviced and fixed, as Doug found out in arriving in Paris after having driven from Peking. And he will need a specialized skill to fix that particular car. And the UK has absolutely if you want, the top spot in terms of specialist restorations. And I just suspect that if you make it more difficult to bring things across with tariffs or any other member of the taxation kind of family, will inevitably reduce the activity, which obviously then has a compounding effect with all the added value, which is hospitality, which is food and beverage, which is everything else which is included in the report. So I can't see any particular positive. What I can hope for is that the industry, amongst the complexities of whatever it is, and you can choose whether you believe a deal is going to come or not, and if that deal is fit for purpose, that we are a resilient industry as much as we can possibly do. So I'm not suggesting doom and gloom, but of course, I have to be very honest, which is, I'd rather not have to deal with this particular extra added complexity in a very complicated world anyway.
Doug, is it doom and gloom?
Obviously, it is going to make various things a lot more difficult. But can I just compare the historic car motor industry with the modern motor industry? The modern motor industry is heavily dependent on just-in-time, and there any delay at the ports is disastrous. At least we're not dealing with that kind of industry. So there are parts of the industry which may even be Brexit-proof. I don't want to exaggerate the impact, but there are just sunlights at the end of the tunnel even, to bring into the context. But of course, all the things that the other people have mentioned are real and important. And so this is just one bit of it, but it may be one of the more important parts of the industry where the production, the repair, the maintenance, the restoration bits, where Britain is a world centre. We'd be nuts to stop that coming into the UK, and we need to make sure that whatever arrangements exist post-Brexit preserve the industry.
Just to give you an idea, a veteran car run with about 450 entries every November, over 25% are overseas entrants. So they're going to think twice about whether they come this year if the legislations are not clear.
Ben, actually, I was going to come back to you on that because you run alongside it, or you have run the Future Car Challenge for low energy vehicles since 2010. So in terms of Royal Automobile Club, it's the whole breadth of everything, encouraging, new low energy, on the other hand, preserving what we've got and heritage. So is that quite a challenge for you as an organisation, going across all those different poles?
Not really. I mean, the original veteran car run in 1896 was an event to promote new technology. The Future Car Challenge was very much an event to promote new technology. So there's a current theme there. I would say one of the biggest challenges we had was actually the efficiency of cars was getting so good after a few years of it. It was becoming very difficult to measure the actual energy consumed over the relatively short distance of 60 miles. So in that itself, it presented challenges. But no, I mean, I think motorists, we all want to do our bit for the environment. I don't know of anybody in the old car world that just wants to go out and spew around fumes and dump carbon. I know of one guy he's got a beautiful DB5, but he also drives a Tesla. It's kind of his way of balancing things. He loves his old car for, as David would say, 1,200 miles a year, but he wants his normal hack is a Tesla because he feels that is him doing his best for the environment. And I think everything's compatible. If you don't look to use technology to reduce the emissions of either new cars or old cars, then you won't go forward.
Just looking about the contributions to UK for a moment, because you've got 1,000-mile trial, ROC Rally of the Test, London Brighton Run that you've talked about. But economically, and you race at Goodwood, for example, these contribute hugely to the UK. And in everything you've been hearing today, etc., how do you as a group, how do we unify to be able to help nurture and protect the industry in the future?
You've got to demonstrate not just the immediate value of the event in terms of participants, but particularly the heritage value. It's a very topical thing, both with SBHVC and at the FIA. David was instrumental in representations to Transport for London to protect the right of historic vehicles to actually go into the centre of London. They're exempt from the ultra-low emission zone. Otherwise, we would have had to stop the veteran car run. And that's a huge event. It brings hundreds of thousands of people on the road down to Brighton. We close Regent Street. We get probably 400,000 or 500,000 people passing through Regent Street on a Saturday with a fascination for old cars of all ages. So it's reassuring, actually, that TfL did see the value economically and as a social sport for people to do. So I don't know if David wants to add to that.
Well, I think some of those negotiations, of course, were with Mr. Johnson when he was Mayor of London, and subsequently with Sadiq Khan. Sadiq Khan was elected on very much a green agenda. And at that time, the Federation was a little bit concerned. But actually making representations to his team, it didn't take many weeks, actually, before Sadiq Khan recognised that the benefit of tourism, leisure, to London was sufficiently valuable to make exemptions for historic vehicles. So, to be honest, very often if you're able, and this is why we do the research, if we can provide valid statistical data, invariably it's that much easier to ask for concessions.
But you already pointed out, and Thomas and Ben have made this point, the attraction of the old cars, love, and people stopping and waving and looking at them on our rallies. You go to villages and they sit out there on their chairs and watch and wave and take pictures. That is a key point, isn't it? That is a big attraction. And hats off to both of you for closing Regent Street and doing what you did. But at the same time, it just shows those sort of people, when you're talking about the Closed Roads Act in England, which of course hasn't been fully utilised yet, but it will be, that's the attraction. A local council would surely say, well, we will put on an event. We are going to fill the beds in winter or whatever. So that's where we have to go, isn't it?
Oh, totally. And that's the reason why in 2016 we introduced attitudinal and behavioural research as a key component of our 2016 report. And we're going to run that data again in late January, early February next year. And it's been difficult with our research because we work on this 5-year cycle. Traditionally, we would have been launching the work at the beginning of 2021. We had to go early because we needed a full year's data, and we could only use 2019 for that research. So that's why we've got this phased release of data. We've given some key numbers at the moment, but then in January, we'll repeat the attitudinal and behavioural work to be able to take awareness of the market in this COVID world as exists early in the new year, with the confidence of vaccine coming into place and hopefully a point where the enthusiasts start to get confidence to come out with their vehicles again.
Great. Thomas, let me turn to you because we were talking about preservation. You've said before this is a non-disposable industry. Tell us about the skills, the apprentices, job satisfaction and the well-being that they get. As I know this is something close to your heart.
Well, I mean, I think it's close to my heart as it is with anybody to know that there is a next generation of people who know what to do. And so, you can't you can't expect the classic car industry to thrive if you don't have, the number of people who, are in the know of how to fix them. Now, what's interesting from our side, of course, is that we see the usage of the cars and the continuous repair. And obviously, there is that wonderful added element of when you see the older generation passing on that knowledge to the younger generation who look, with big eyes as to, their role model, their possibility of joining us on our events or being part of the wider world, whether it's rallying, racing, helping in museums, the whole conservation. So, and as I said before, what I thought was particularly, positive, which is, just such a breath of fresh air, is that the principle of well-being, how happy are you in the workplace when you're working in this industry, seems to be much higher, as is the financial, if you want, rewards that average industry participants are paid a percentage more than their, if you want, colleagues in other industries. So then personally, I always say, there are too many, having been working in the financial industry, that there are too many bankers, too many lawyers, accountants, advertisers, and not enough joiners, carpenters, machinists, and panel beaters, and all the rest of it. I think there's enough, wealth really for that to go around without, thinking or assuming that they are second-class citizens, because of course they're not. They are artists, exactly as Ben pointed out. So the skills here on site and more widely around the country and widely where classic cars are is a fundamental element to kind of buck the trend of all things screen, all things touch, and all things synthetic, but go back to the outside world and using your fingers, which are actually quite sophisticated little things.
Right. Doug, let me come back to you on that about the skills factor. And obviously, there is a premium in terms of the wages for the skills. And then tell us a little bit what you found out about well-being as well.
There are two fascinating and possibly the most fascinating results that we got when we were looking through at skills. There is a skill premium in the industry. And if you work in the industry, in the restoration, repair, maintenance part of the industry, you get a 70% wage premium over the relevant manual wage for what you're doing, which is a really considerable pay premium. And it means that the jobs, from a pay perspective, they're good jobs because it gives you a really decent amount of earnings coming through. But it's not just the 70% pay premium that makes the difference. The surveys of the jobs and job satisfaction show that the jobs in the industry, and this is a more widespread thing, it's not just the manual jobs, it's a lot of the other jobs as well, are in the top 8% in the whole country of all jobs in terms of job satisfaction. Now that's stunning, because you spend far too much of your life at work. I mean, we all do. And if you can be happy in what you're doing, it's half your waking hours. And if you can be happy in what you're doing, that is a real basis for satisfaction. So not only do the jobs pay pretty well, but they also make you happy.
So well-being and then mental health is better because of that. You found that out in your studies, David.
Yeah, indeed. And I think, maybe a fairly short answer, but historic vehicles actually represent a pretty cute prescription to address well-being issues. There's passion there. And I was up in North Yorkshire last week. Of course, one of our first initiatives on the environmental agenda is talking to potential partners from the perspective of tree plantations. And we were talking to an organisation last week who actually demonstrate through their other business attitudes that actually it would be very easy to make the transition between contributing to the planting of trees and actually learning more about nature as a result of going to visit these plantations that people have contributed to. And that was an additional spin-off that came, it certainly wasn't anticipated by me, but it was quite a pertinent piece of learning last week.
Ben, I'm just going to come to you because Rev's Art, Adam Gompertz, who many know is the chaplain here at Bicester Heritage, and he was asking specifically about that, about mental well-being classics and what it gives us. And Ben, in current mental health challenges like COVID, for example, the enjoyment of classics, both at real and virtual events, do you feel it's been important?
Hugely so. I mean, where you can under COVID regulations, actually get out and enjoy your cars. I mean, a good example was the veteran car run this year. We had to cancel because of the regulations that were in place, but we ran the virtual veteran car run, where we encouraged individuals to get out on their own cars, whether in a bubble or with masks on with their best mate, and just get out on the road, enjoy the cars for what they are. It was a huge success, and as David said, often you discover things unintentionally. It opened our doors to the fact that whilst we might have a real run, we can run a virtual run for people who can't necessarily get down to London next year. So it was a huge success. People were posting videos of what they were doing. It got people out, built their spirits up again in what otherwise was quite a depressing time. And if you like spanning your own cars, I'd always urge anybody to go and self-isolate in the garage.
Haven't tried it yet, but I'm going to go. Something new. Right. Adam also asks another question, and I'm going to see who's going to take this. What support might be available to allow owners who have to keep classics on a shoestring budget to make costly changes to their cars? For example, the use of synthetic fuels. David, would you like to start with that one?
Well, I think the response to that has to be recognition of the low mileage that these vehicles are covering. So in reality, for the enjoyment, for the well-being that enthusiasts will receive, I think actually the additional cost is relatively small.
I mean, I'll just add to that. I think the key thing is that any legislation needs to have sufficient time to allow people that are working quite a tight budget to implement any changes over a period of time as part of their regular and planned maintenance. Just if you introduced a rule on synthetic fuel and said everybody has to use it in 12 months' time, that would be quite draconian, and a lot of people would incur extra costs because they've got to rebuild their engines. If you said it's going to be, and taking on board David's comments, it's, the emissions are low. If it's implemented over 5 years or 10 years, you should be able to schedule that within your budget and within your maintenance. So actually the real cost is relatively low, if not at all.
Okay. Question from the Association of Heritage Engineers, and they ask, do the panel feel, as I do, that our industry has been at the forefront of the repair-based sustainable future economy, of which many now speak of for many decades? And is this something now that we really need to promote out front? Thomas?
Yes, I mean, I think it's the question is so well put. It was addressed before. I mean, the problem is that, we've gone down a route, and I suspect younger generations are slightly more exposed to that, so they tend to be bigger users of the idea of buy and throw away, also because it's typically cheaper to throw away and buy the new product, especially with white goods and other things. And what we should try to do all is make a conscious effort where actually we can go back to fixing the parts. And so the classic car, as the question makes, has effectively shown how that is done. Definitely, my vivid suggestion would be to make sure that this element of what we already do by virtue of the limitations of the classic car and everything that Doug was alluding to before is promoted and replicated in industries where it's not so obvious right now. I can think of many different industries where you don't have to necessarily change the hardware, at every single time, and that would obviously help with the sustainability and a slight amendment of culture, which we would all enjoy.
Okay, Doug, I'm going to come back to you on this one. Okay, as you and David have done this, you have to do the figures from 2019, the complete year. I'm not able to do that in COVID in 2020, but have you seen any examples between you of the resilience of the industry that Thomas was talking about in 2020?
I'll mention two examples, but I'm sure other people on the panel can come up with better ones as well. My two examples are, first of all, what's happened to the auction prices of classic cars. And they've held up really well. I think if you'd asked the majority of people just after the beginning of lockdown what was going to happen to the auction prices, they would have expected them to collapse. And the amazing news is they haven't. They've held up really well and in some cases gone up. So that is the first bit of evidence of the resilience of the industry. The second bit of evidence is from the garages, because we talked to a fair number of them while we were doing this, and it's quite clear that people have taken advantage of the period of lockdown, many of them to get their cars restored, to do those jobs that they'd always meant to do and hadn't had a chance to do. And they've taken advantage of the fact that they haven't been able to use their cars so much, and instead go and do those bits of important maintenance that have been required. And the garages, most of them, have never been busier.
David, anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll answer from a club perspective, if I may. Because, as you kindly said earlier on, you know, our membership is over 500 clubs. COVID arrived. Our membership renewal actually occurs on the 1st of June. So during that March and April period, you know, there are an awful lot of clubs pushing back, needing help. We were working far longer hours than we would normally to give advice to clubs. And I just didn't know how this was going to pan out, because you have to pay to be a member of the federation. And what was interesting was when we sent the membership renewals out, people were rejoining instantly and very positively. And actually, we quite soon got over that tipping point of 500 clubs. And I think that's a great indication of the enthusiasm for the movement. And clubs have done all sorts of things. They've done, you know, quizzes online by Zoom. They've done podcasts, the larger clubs. The smaller ones have done treasure hunts at home. And of course, enthusiasts themselves, as Doug said, have recognised here's an opportunity to finish that restoration that I never seem to get completed. So our view is very, very positive of the club scene.
I mean, we have a similar view, and you're just talking about people being kept to get engaged as well. Tabletop rallies and navigation, so on.
Yeah.
We have an enormous, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people playing. But also, we started off with COVID-19 charities, and we've ended up with Hospitality Action and raising a lot of money for the charities that really needed. So that's a great benefit. Thomas, I'm going to come to you with this question. It's from Charlie Calderwood from Classic Car Weekly. And he says, right, competitors on Hero ERA events will drive more than 1,200 miles on just one event. Not to mention associated long-haul flights. Will Hero ERA release CO2 figures on its own activities?
It's a very good question. And yes, so last year we announced during our annual Hero Cup dinner the plans for Hero to go, carbon neutral. And this is something that we're actively working on as we speak, actually. Obviously we have to be a little bit tolerant with the speed at which that will be delivered, given the difficult year that we've all discussed. And what was announced, and it's in the public domain, is a mixture of all things which are effective in regards to the carbon sequestration, which means planting trees, buying credits from those companies that are involved in that business in order to offer a platform for that to happen. So Hero ERA is looking to make sure that, from our perspective, once you've come on our rally, you're not contributing, and that will calculate what flights you've taken. If you've used a company, a carrier that is already carbon neutral, some will go that direction. So you steer traffic to those who are responsible, environmentally aware. We will obviously do it as a platform that was announced, and we're looking at ways to make it not, if you want, capital intensive for the average user to achieve the same goal without necessarily being on our event. So for the everyday car usage. And we have a whole team who's working very, very hard to deliver that ASAP.
Once you get through COVID and you get the whole system up and running, all those figures will be available.
Absolutely. Transparency is the key thing
So,
here.
Charlie, I hope that answers your question for now. But unity of purpose is what hopefully is coming across today. And I particularly want to ask David and Ben now how you take all these different messages to the parliamentarians. House of Lords, for example, the motoring group in Houses of Parliament, I know that you both involved there. Is this a way of getting the messages directly through to the right people?
Yeah, I think, you know, if I reflect back 10 years ago, our relationship was with the all-party parliamentary historic vehicle group, with Department for Transport and their agencies. Since then, we still do all of that, but we're actually engaging more and more government departments as a result of our other activities. So just to name two, Department for Education, we're now very active with them as far as the heritage engineering apprenticeship is concerned. And actually from the heritage perspective, a department that is very, very proactive is the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. And they pick things up very, very quickly. And actually the position statement that we issued, actually we worked through the Heritage Alliance, who we've been members of for many, many years. And the chief exec of Heritage Alliance, a lady called Lizzie Glitherow West, actually got our position statement into DCMS the afternoon that I think we released it at about 12 noon. And in the afternoon, they said, it's in front of the minister. And it's been proactive and very quick to work together, Ben.
Yeah, I just reiterate, it's having a consolidated approach. Bringing the four of us together means that when you go and speak to the levers of power at government, you've got clout, and you're also bringing together more knowledge, Doug's detailed research. So today's report demonstrates a very current and contemporary approach to the challenges of our industry. And it is great, it's vibrant, but there's always going to be challenges. And the more you show that you address it, the more respect you get in Parliament, because you're on the front foot and you're actively engaging.
Right, so one of the big issues then, Thomas, coming to you is 113,000 people across the industry. Ben talked about the great figures on apprentices, but it's getting them to understand how important it is for this whole line coming down. And if I bring up that figure 10 then on the apprentice stats as well, starting with you, Thomas, how are we going to encourage more people into the apprenticeships?
Well, I mean, I would say that enthusiasm is a big contributor. Aspiration is another one. So, you know, the imagery that we offer in terms of what we do, and we're just the dynamic section, you know, aspect of the industry. Clearly, there's more static elements too. Has that kind of wow factor where somebody says, that's what I want to do. I mean, this is true in many other industries. But of course, here you're playing into a field of emotions, of adventure, of travel, which involves so many different senses rather than just, you know, and on top of that, well, we've also found out that on average you have 70% wage premium and very good well-being. So the more the message goes out there, the more we'll be able to have a flight to quality and choice to service a hopefully growing industry by virtue of restoring all those other vehicles that are in need of restoration, or the ones that are in need of restoration certainly after some of our toughest events. But yeah, so I think it's a positive, and we can do a lot together in making sure we channel that enthusiasm and the job set and the skills where you're taught the trade all together.
I think to make that clear as well, that everybody here is behind the movement of Bicester Heritage, Starter Motor getting young people into old cars for a start. And I know we have here the Heritage Skills Academy, which is now branched out into Brooklands as well, which is absolutely fabulous. And then we've also already heard from the Association of Heritage Engineers, all of whom Doug has spoken to, David has spoken to, and we've got the stats from them as well. Just looking at the numbers of historic and classic vehicles, Doug, and looking at the table one, we've got the size and the value on there. You can make a quick comment, if you wouldn't mind, on that particular graphic.
There are 3 million classic and historic vehicles, that's over 15 or over 20 years old on our measure. And we took fairly cautious. We went actually model by model and worked out how much they were all worth. And we sort of aimed down, not up, because what you think your car's worth may not be actually what it is worth when you come to try and sell it. And we valued the total at £12.6 billion, which is quite a lot of money, really. And it's quite a lot that's tied up, providing this satisfaction for people in the industry.
Right, so David, just coming to you now on the ownership of the historic vehicles in the UK, it's quite remarkable. I know you spoke about the figure before as per your last report, but it's the growth that you've seen over the last 10 years. It's stupendous, isn't it?
Yeah, it's. I was just looking here at a comparative between the number of vehicles in 2016 and the number in 2020. And, you know, we're seeing consistent growth in each category. So, as you know, Tony, we talk of 7 categories of vehicle that we look after. And actually, if I look at cars, increase from 512,000 to 774. Motorcycles is quite interesting because that's 27% of the population. So they've increased from just under 300,000 to 417. Tractors, 10% of the market, and then through buses, coaches, lorries, all of these segments have seen consistent growth, and that's got to be very, very positive.
Yeah, absolutely, David. Let's just move on to these 3 tables now. On table 3, the UK classic fleet by numbers, Doug, and we'll quickly talk through these before we get to our 2 or 3 last questions before we come to a close. On table 3, we've got the UK classic fleet, which is by numbers. And there at the top, we have Ford, I think inevitably in some way. Some big numbers there, Doug.
It's 172,000 Fords. Sometimes the image of the classic vehicle is a Bentley or an Aston Martin or a Ferrari. But the whole point about this movement is there are different parts of it. And it's worth noting that the biggest single part is the people who own Fords, not the people who own Bentleys. And the second biggest part is the people who own Volkswagens. So it shows that this is a sector that covers all different facets of the population. It's not just a rich man's plaything, it's something for everyone. And a lot of these people are quite young as well. So it's not just something for the middle-aged or the retired people. It's something for younger people and people who get excited by this and get excited by repair and reuse and get excited by being part of the heritage.
Very good point, well made. Something for everybody in this industry. Certainly in table 5, the most valuable that we have there. Doug, a quick comment on that.
Well, this is a bit like a race, isn't it? Because you can see at the top, it's Porsche, E-Type Jaguar. Next, though, quite interesting, it's Mini. The average value of a Mini is roughly 5,000. And if you add up the value of all the minis, it makes it the third most valuable fleet of particular model. So that is quite impressive, and it just shows how they contribute, how this is a very different mix of things. There are some exotica like the E-Type Jaguar, Porsche 911, well, there are quite a lot of them around, and they're still quite valuable, which is why they're the most valuable model that's available. But you've got Mini coming in there afterwards, MGB, and then, of course, you've got another exotic one, which is Aston Martin DB5, the James Bond vehicle. So it's a mix of different things that create the value of this fleet, which is why it's so diverse.
That's why the Mini pushed its way to the front of the queues, you can see. And then table 2 on there is the value of the classic car fleet as well, which is just a brief comment on that one, Doug.
Well, the previous table showed by model. This shows by manufacturer. And again, it's a bit like a race. It's Porsche, Jaguar, Aston Martin at the top. And that sounds like a sort of motor race from the 1950s, doesn't it? But you work your way around. You've got BMW, Ferrari, Mercedes, MG, Ford up there, Bentley up there, and Land Rover up there. And by the way, we've had problems capturing Land Rovers because some of them count as commercial vehicles and some of them count as cars. And so the totals are probably understated. But this is how the industry works out.
Indeed, yes, super. Thank you very much. I'm just going to come to a few questions that have come in here as well. Let me start with this one. Do your numbers for the impact of classic car ownership on the environment take into account the subsidiary effects, such as carbon generated by the transportation of classic cars, or the impact of food vendors appearing at and travelling to classic car events, or the consumables that are used in the preparation and maintenance of these vehicles, Doug?
Very much so. For those who have the report, Table 23 on page 60 explains how we've worked our way through. We've used something which is technical, and forgive me for talking about something which is technical, called input-output modelling. And what that does is it measures the economy not just when someone sells you something, you buy a burger, but it then goes all the way back to the person who supplies the bun, the person who supplies the meat, the person who works in the shop, the person who supplies the building, every bit of it. And it traces it all the way back through the economy. And what we show from that analysis is the contribution of every single bit. Now, obviously, some of these things are estimates, but we've made honest estimates, and I think they're fair.
David, I think this one might be for you. Your report suggests that the classic car sector is very much a growth industry, which it is. What are the projected impacts on the environment if the industry continues to grow at its current rate, or indeed at an increased rate?
We've got slightly different numbers on growth, but who knows, because we're in such a different situation now. But the industry certainly does appear to be growing. And so it starts from a low base. Remember that the environmental emissions, however much they grow, are still going to be very low by comparison with pretty well everything else. And that's the first point. It's terribly important to remember. But the second point is that the industry is committed to going green. And on any reasonable expectation of growth, the industry can go green faster than it grows. The industry can increase its efficiency faster than it can grow. So the great probability is that the industry will contribute less in emissions in the future than it does now. I would be amazed if that were not the case.
One for you, Ben. Sorry, Dave, did you want to add to that one?
No, just to support the point that Doug has made. And, I can't say too much at the moment, but we've just signed a memorandum of understanding with a university to help us really get a grasp of the environmental topics. And we wouldn't have thought of doing that probably 2 years ago, let alone 5 years ago. So we want to be ahead of the game, and I think being ahead of the game, I think we can do what Doug is suggesting, that we can negate that growth relatively effectively.
Okay, does the panel think that the Chancellor could scupper future growth for the industry, Ben?
In one word, yes, he potentially could, but one would hope he doesn't. We're back down to the importance...
Sorry for the hospital pass.
Yeah. We're back down to the importance of influencing government policy and, most importantly, demonstrating ourselves to be a responsible industry, a responsible sport. Because, as David said, what this industry does cuts across different government departments, whether it's culture, media and sport, or whether it's biz. So you've got to present yourself at all those different levels and demonstrate that responsibility. So anything's possible, but I think this report shows a comprehensive, well-researched introspection into what we do, and it draws conclusions. So I think that would be gratefully received in part in government, and they'd recognise that we are trying to manage what we do responsibly.
Great, yeah, superb. Thank you, Ben. I'm going to finish with you, Thomas, if I may, because we've talked about being here at Bicester Heritage. We've talked about the advantages economically from Doug and from David, and Ben has added to that as well. You've come here, Motorsport UK, which are going to be just over there. So where are they going with Bicester Motion? Are you in harmony with all that? And where are you going to take your company?
Well, goodness. The answer is yes. I mean, this quarter of the site is Bicester Heritage. The wider venture is Bicester Motion, and as the name suggests, it will address all parts of what is available from mobility. Very few people know that the electric car has been around for much longer than Tesla. I mean, we have people wanting to do some of our events with 1960s electric cars, and there was actually a big movement in the 1950s and earlier. And then the internal combustion engine won that particular duel. So yeah, and whether it's hydrogen, alternative fuels, and anything that engineer will come up will be based in one shape or form at Bicester Motion through the experience quarter, through the tracks, and all the other activities that the company is looking to do. And we would like to be able to have in our capabilities the knowledge, the enthusiasm, the capability to offer fun things to do with that technology, not morphing into that, but adding to what we do on the heritage, so that like the example that I think Ben came up of having the Aston Martin and the Tesla or the MGB and any other more affordable electric sustainable hydrogen car. So yeah, we'd very much like to be involved in the futures of Bicester Motion.
Gentlemen, thank you for the moment. I'll come back to thank you officially in just a moment. Just to say to everybody that we will be producing a follow-up press release, a media release later on today with some pictures and links again for you to be able to download the report for free. And as I've said, if you look on the YouTube channel on there, you'll see how to do that. Also, you can do that through Heroics and through our own websites as well and be able to download that. An enormous amount of already been downloaded around the world shows how important and just what an impact this study will actually have, and just showing what the contribution of this industry is to UK, which is great. Also on there, you're saying that those are some of the people who contributed to this report, not least, of course, David Whale and the Federation and their fantastic continuing research. And again, we look forward to more research in January, but you can see the sort of people who have contributed. Big players in the industry as well. Michelin, for example, a lot of people here at Bicester Heritage themselves. But thank you on behalf of all of us to all of them to contribute to making this information. I think, as Ben said, this really is something that we can use because it reaches conclusions, which is very, very important indeed. So thank you all for being with us, and I know there's many of you media out there as well as enthusiasts and car clubs and associations of engineers, etc. We hope you found this very, very useful and you're encouraged about where the industry, your industry, is going, and that you are satisfied, as many of us are, that the leaders of many segments of this industry are taking us forward the way they are. So I'd like to thank Doug McWilliams and CEBR for a fantastic study from the Centre for Economics and Business Research. Thank you so much, Doug. Ben Cousins, as the chairman of the Royal Automobile Club, and not just all your memberships, but your influence and your work in motoring. And it's great to have you with us and your insights as well. Ben, we really do appreciate that time. And David Whale, thank you so very much indeed as chairman of the Federation of British Historic Vehicle Clubs. So many members, 250,000 people we're talking about there. It is really brilliant. Thomas de Vargas Machuca, as chairman of Hero ERA, thank you for hosting us. Thank you for your contribution. We know you've got an event coming up next Saturday. Perhaps you'd give us the name of that event?
Yes, it's a bit like this year's 2020. Per ardua ad infinitum, the hard way forever. Very similar to the RAF ones, but this is, so.
But that's part and parcel of making use of BISTO with our partnership here, because a lot of the event will take place here on the runways and so on. And I think you'd best describe it as going down a red run, wouldn't you?
Well, correct. I mean, absolutely. I mean, the facilities here are phenomenal. It's on private land. Of course, we're complying with all the COVID restrictions. Obviously, we've had to lose a number of competitors who are in the various T3s that were announced last night. But look, we're all in it here to make sure that the right things are done. And thankfully, the classic car and households are a protected environment, for lack of better words. And yes, and long live the industry. And let's look for 2021, which is a little bit more dynamic than this year. But from us, a very big thank you to Doug and CBR, of course, the Royal Automobile Club and the Federation for supporting, without one moment of hesitation, this combined effort, all from Zoom. And let's help everybody who needs to be helped do it.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you to our illustrious panel. As I said, expert panel, expert views. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope, more than that you can use the power of the report. And we hope to see you all very soon enjoying your historic and classic motor cars and vehicles. Of course, it might be your steam engine, mightn't it, Mr. Whale? So enjoy, and thank you for your time, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you. Have a happy Christmas.